In a Funhouse dungeon, you laugh because things don't make sense. In a horror scenario, you scream for the same reason. Please sit back, relax, and let's talk about creating true fear in a horror role-playing game. Focus on breaking certainty as your main design principle. And the game master must ask themselves, is this going to instill fear in the character, or are you making the player afraid of you? The difference is what separates a great game master from a lousy one. In horror, silence has immense value, and when the game master speaks, they are diminishing that value. Therefore, their words must be thoughtful and deliberate so as to add value. We're going to discuss how to do that and teach you my advanced horror techniques. This video assumes you've already watched my Basic Horror 101 video. The purpose of this discussion is to demonstrate how a game master may cultivate sophisticated forms of fear within a role-playing game. To clarify, consider the distinction between a psychological thriller and a slasher film. While a psychological thriller engages the audience through suspense, uncertainty, and intellectual engagement, a slasher film often relies on sudden shocks and graphic imagery to provoke immediate but superficial reactions. This analogy emphasizes the value of fear that elicits sustained engagement and what I call the mind fuck, as opposed to transient or purely sensational responses. Fear should draw your players in and keep them engaged, not push them too far. Trauma takes away the sense of safety that makes fear fun. If your group has agreed to explore deep and intense themes and everyone's on board, that's your prerogative. Personally, I believe in a different approach, but role-playing games can be customized to fit the preferences and boundaries of each group. Despite what some of my detractors claim, I do not give a flying fuck what you play, how you play, what you do. I'm only here to share tips that I hope may be useful to you. I've said it before, no one on YouTube is truly teaching you how to run games. We're just showing you how we do it. Your job is to take what helps you, ignore what doesn't, and find your own style. Don't make the mistake of thinking that anyone's advice, including mine, is a one-size-fits-all. And as for Reddit, well, that's where stupid people learn to play D&D from other stupid people. And you're not stupid, so you already know that. When you run horror, your goal isn't to make your players lose control. Instead, you want them to care about outcomes. Fear is like a string under tension. You want to gently pull it, not break it. Uncertainty keeps them on their toes. Silence grabs their attention. Ambiguity encourages them to work together. Fear helps everyone focus and makes the game more exciting. Trauma does the opposite. It tells players they have no control and aren't safe, even at the table. When someone stops feeling safe, the magic of the game disappears. Their imagination shuts down and they go into defense mode. If you want to run that kind of game, that's your choice. In my opinion, trauma destroys the very sense of safety that lets fear work as play. An effective way to clarify this argument is to compare mastering horror game design to learning the guitar. Beginners may produce discordant sounds just as novice game masters may rely on torturing their players or disruptive techniques. With practice, both musicians and game masters develop greater skill and nuance. However, creating truly impactful horror, experiences like delivering a moving musical performance, require more than technical skill. It demands a thoughtful understanding of the underlying principles and a deliberate approach. Mastery in horror game design is achieved through intentional application of core concepts, not through routine repetition or surface-level imitation. Now, apply those three levels to running a horror role-playing game. A game master who tries to exploit players' fears is like someone just banging on a guitar. They're not making real music. We all know it would be wrong to physically strike a player with a real sword during a combat encounter. So why would anyone believe that horror requires the infliction of real emotional pain? That's just noise, and both examples hurt my fucking ears. A good friend, a college professor who happens to run his school's gaming club, GMing for students, as well as playing in my current campaign of nearly 3 years, recently said, "A blank sheet of paper has value. The moment you write on it, that paper loses value. Therefore, what you write on it must increase the paper's value. As I stated in the beginning, in a game exploring fear and horror, silence is the same. Silence has value. So the game master must be certain that when they break that silence, they're adding value. In my first horror video, I covered the basics. That's like a guitarist just starting lessons. We went over the fundamentals, building atmosphere, using descriptions, and pacing, emotions. I explained how to create fear without relying on gore, using imagination and subtlety instead of shock. We talked about using all of the senses to make scenes feel real, and how lighting, sounds, and classic horror settings can keep players guessing. We also looked at the challenges of running horror in systems like 5e, where the rules can make fear harder to create. I shared ways to use monsters in new ways, limit resources, isolate characters, and add time pressure to build tension. While these methods are particularly relevant in 5e, they are easily adaptable to other systems. For instance, in the Call of Cthulhu system, you can enhance fear by emphasizing investigative elements and the fragility of player characters, as these align with the themes of cosmic horror. By doing so, the player's reliance on wits rather than brawn can heighten the tension. Experienced GMs can take the core ideas and tweak them to fit the mechanics and dynamics of any role-playing game, making the concepts broadly applicable. Regardless of the system, it's crucial to stress the importance of not having players be afraid of their own game master, but rather feel fear through their characters. That's the difference between entertainment and abuse. My first horror video was created to help you learn those basics, but becoming an expert takes more. Even with all of those tips, you'll hit some limits. You can run a horror game, but you're not a master yet. That's what this video is for. It's important to note that the following challenges are presented without grading or ranks. This approach allows for a comprehensive examination of each issue independently, rather than implying a predetermined order or significance. By outlining the primary obstacles in this way, I aim to provide a clear roadmap for analysis and discussion. The initial challenge in cultivating effective horror within role-playing games originates not from the game system or its mechanics, but rather from the game master. This underscores the game master's role in shaping players' experience. Many game masters and many people don't understand what fear really is. They think it's about trauma, gore, or control. They believe that to make players afraid, they have to hurt them emotionally, or that fear is just shock and disgust. Fear isn't pain, it's awareness. It's your brain warning you that something important is wrong and that matters. Fear comes from ignorance. Fear comes from not knowing. Fear comes from not understanding. And how fear manifests is not always that extreme example of running away screaming. Fear is often a natural reaction to what we do not understand, and it manifests in many different forms. Before someone can even begin to run an effective horror adventure with the goal of evoking fear, they must understand fear. Yes, one might fear running into obvious danger. Charging a beach into enemy gunfire is most certainly going to evoke fear. But that type of fear has nothing to do with tabletop role-playing games, unless of course your GM is a jerk. The game master who thinks they need to attack the player's real phobias and exploit their real fears for horror doesn't understand the assignment. Now, to repeat what I said in the beginning, the game master must focus on breaking certainty as their main design principle. The second problem begins with the players themselves. A role-playing game, by definition, depends on role-playing. Yet in practice, many players approach horror as if it were only a sequence of dice rolls. And perhaps it's those players, the ones who refuse to inhabit their characters, that helped create the game masters who try to force fear through cruelty. When players don't understand what role-playing means, when they won't carry their share of the story, they leave the GM desperate to fill that emotional void. That's where misguided shock therapy, tabletop game horror originates. Fear is mental, not physical. Dice can only do so much. Just like actors in a film, players must imagine their characters' emotions, their doubts, their panic, their hope. When they do that, when they truly sink into the mind of the person they're portraying, the burden of creating fear no longer rests entirely on the game master. The table becomes a shared stage, and the illusion of horror becomes believable. I promise you, losing yourself in your character's fear is far more enjoyable than being traumatized by a desperate game master trying to force your participation. game. And that leads us to the next problem, the mechanics of fear. This next problem belongs neither to the game master nor to the players. It belongs to the games themselves. When a game gives you obstacles or threats with a stat block, those stat blocks represent limitations. This means those challenges can be measured, strategized against, and eventually overcome, all of which kill fear. One of the dumbest design choices ever made in Dungeons & Dragons was in Deities and Demigods for 1st edition AD&D. They gave gods stat blocks. They stripped them of divinity. Suddenly they weren't gods at all. They were just bags of hit points. To this day, I still remember a kid in high school bragging that he killed Asmodeus. Think about that. Never mind the struggling noob DM that allowed that to even be obtainable. The Lord of Hell, defeated by a party of teenagers with good dice rolls. That produced a moment of serotonin while diminishing every threat thereafter. That same mistake was repeated with the archdevils and demon lords. What was once unknowable and terrifying became just another encounter, just another stat block. Encountering a demon lord should be an act of cosmic dread. It should evoke the same awe and horror as staring into the sun and being burned alive. But when the rules make the gods breakable, the terror dies. Horror only thrives when the threats break the rules of predictability. When you can't be sure what's possible, when the familiar boundaries of the game itself start to blur, that's when true fear returns to the table. Horror is the cousin of comedy. Both rely on timing, surprise, and the breakdown of logic. I talked about this idea of bending reality in my Funhouse dungeon video, where I explained that verisimilitude, the appearance of truth, is vital. Everything in your world should have a reason, but the game master doesn't really even need to know what that reason is. The same rule applies to horror. Phone that rings even though it's not plugged in. A door that disappears and then reappears on the ceiling. Those details don't need explanations, they just need to feel wrong. In a Funhouse dungeon, you laugh because things don't make sense. In a horror scenario, you scream for the same reason. The Funhouse and the haunted house share the same architecture. Horror just fills it with a lot more blood. Every good horror movie is just one big Funhouse dungeon. It's a place that is dangerous and doesn't seem to make sense. A place where death awaits behind every wrong choice. As a game master, you are encouraged to improvise, react to your players, and bend reality. The next problem is closely tied to the previous, but just like the previous, it can be easily fixed by the game master. Horror films do not follow the rules, so why should the game? I'm not talking about becoming an adversarial GM. I'm talking about having your own hidden set of house rules. Rules you do not share with your players. Rules that offer guidance for you, but are never revealed to the players until after the adventure has concluded, if at all. This connects to our observations regarding stat blocks reducing challenges into victories. If the unknown was already known, the horror would be over before it began. Horror is a process of learning, adapting, overcoming. If everyone already knows the rules, there's really very little to fear. In fact, you've already seen films exposing this, mocking the tropes that have become punchlines. Knowing the rules prevents participants from feeling helpless, and fear requires a degree of helplessness. You'll find a link down below of house rules that you can implement for this. Horror is the one genre in gaming where you're allowed to cheat. You're allowed to improvise and bend the known rules. Horror is the one genre where the game master goes beyond their agreed upon limitations. Horror can be a railroad, and the players are in for the ride. Of course, we could talk about character death, how it is no fun to have your character die. We could talk about how boring it is to sit there watching others have fun after your character has bit the dust. I believe these drawbacks have already been discussed ad nauseum, but here's a few tips. Never ever kill an important NPC from your character's backstory, but you're allowed to make them think that threat exists. You're allowed to make your players believe that might happen or has happened, but never actually do it. That's just hack GMing 101. You can make an important NPC a target for some evil foe and create tension, but don't go through with it. If you need an explanation, we can discuss that in a different future video. As for character death, this is why the Dread role-playing game is my favorite for horror, a one-shot that solves all of the problems inherent in other games. Check out my video on that topic. But in any other system, you must think of death less about mechanics and more about participation design. The underlying principle is death should transform play, not terminate it. Have you seen Army of Darkness, where Ash ends up fighting evil Ash? What happens when a player dies only to be reborn as a revenant? Imagine you're playing Curse of Strahd, and instead of death, your character is now a vampire minion, but the transformation has not taken hold. What might happen then? Does the group even know that's a possibility? With everything said here, your first step is to ensure you connect with what your players care about, not what scares them. And then remember, horror works best when you abandon the normal assumptions of RPGs. Balance, fairness, and stat-based predictability all kill fear. Monsters break rules until they're revealed. Death shifts you into a new rule rather than ejecting you from the game. And to achieve this balance, remember, fear is what happens when you lose control. It's often said that a good GM never says no to their players. But forget that, because in horror, you need to say no a lot, because the genre of horror doesn't operate like any other. All those pesky rules, knowing the rules, stat blocks, and game masters who confuse fear with trauma are your worst enemies at the gaming table. Don't be afraid to overcome them and truly enjoy the fear you can experience in a game of make-believe. I hope this video has been helpful. We still have more to talk about, so please watch my other videos on this subject. And as always, I'm your host and friend, Atten, here at We Love TTRPGs. Please stab all those buttons down below and leave your thoughts in the comments. Most of all, thanks for watching.